Cheryl, and we created this podcast as the Adult Leadership Advisory Board, or ALAB. Who we are in terms of ALAB is a group that focuses on issues, challenges, and difficult topics facing our community. We are working hard to develop educational programming, social tools, and fundraising initiatives to inform, include, and support adults with cystinosis, but ultimately anybody in our community, our friends, our families, our neighbors, and anybody that might or might not be affected by cystinosis. We, as the Adult Leadership Advisory Board, are funded and work under the Cystinosis Research Network. For those of you out there who might not necessarily understand or know what cystinosis is characterized by the accumulation of the amino acid, or one of the amino acids, cysteine, within the cells. When the cysteine builds up in the cells, it often forms crystals and will sometimes attack certain organs and tissues, predominantly the kidneys, but also includes the eyes, muscles, thyroid, brain, pancreas, and testes. Previously, it was known that an individual born with cystinosis would not live past 10. It's pretty grim, and I'm sure many families out there were quite devastated when they had a newborn who was diagnosed with this disease, cystinosis. However, today we have members in our community living well past 50 years old.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next podcast episode where we will be discussing COVID-19 and vaccinations with two special guests joining us. My fellow podcast members are joining us today too, and they are Steve and Jana. Our first special guest is a person from the cystinosis community who wishes to remain anonymous and who wants to tell their story with vaccination experiences and their work. Our next special guest is Dr. Emily Ricotta, who is a research fellow and infectious disease epidemiologist in the Division of Intramural Research at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. She will be answering our questions on the subjects today. First, we will start by letting our fellow community member tell their story.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me for this opportunity. I wanted to share a little bit of my vaccination story. I was very hesitant in the beginning of receiving the vaccine, only because I was scared of how I was going to react with the symptoms. I did reach out to the cystinosis community with their opinions and thoughts and what my doctor would say. Everyone kind of, cheered me on to do it and kind of told me, hey, just imagine, if you weren't protected against it, if you were to catch it, it would probably be worse than what the symptoms would be. And I thought about it and, it would be safe for me. Everyone has been telling me it's safe. So I did finally come around and I did it. Myself and my son did this, and I'm glad I did, to protect the family at home, to protect everyone around me, because it's scary. It's a scary world right now. We're unsure of, once we get sick, is it COVID? Am I passing it around? So I did decide the best thing for me would be to get the vaccines, and I am due for a third vaccine soon. So that is my story and my little bit of my thoughts.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll go right into the questions for Dr. Emily Ricotta. Our first question is Jana has. Dr. Ricotta, when are kids going to be able to get vaccinated, and how will the vaccine affect kids?
Sure. So we're not sure the exact date yet for when kids are going to be able to receive the vaccine. Pfizer is saying that they're expecting to have the results of their trial in children. 5 to 11-year-olds, they're hoping to have the data out end of September or beginning of October. And then they're hoping to have the 6-month to 5-year-olds shortly after that. And so the hope is that by late fall, we should have vaccines for some of the younger kids. And, it remains to be seen whether that's actually going to be the case. Science doesn't always play nice, but that's the hope. And so far, Pfizer's been doing a really great job. And so we're all really hopeful. My research, we're preparing to enroll the kids. So we're looking forward to that. Vaccines, we vaccinate kids all the time with all sorts of things. And so this vaccine should be just the same. Kids have a really robust immune system. And so they should be able to, take this vaccine and make a really robust response to COVID. So it should be really, really good. We're looking forward to it.
That's good to hear. All right. You recommend that they still wear masks after they get the vaccine?
So I do recommend that if people are going to be indoors for prolonged periods of time, you should still wear masks. This includes kids, because we're going to be, schools, kids are going to be in close contact. They'll be there for a number of hours. And we just don't know who in the community is actually immune. So even if we have a classroom full of kids and they say they're all immunized, what happens if we have one of the kids who has some sort of immune disorder, or the teacher has an immune disorder? When they go out outside and they play in the playground, maybe they don't need to wear their masks. But I still recommend that when people are inside, even kids, if they can, to continue wearing their masks, especially with Delta. It's much more transmissible than any of the original strains of COVID that we've seen. So it's just to protect the community, to be on the safer side. Wearing a mask, it's not going to hurt anything.
No, it's not. I agree. She has one more question.
Great.
How efficient is the vaccine with people who are immunosuppressant?
So it really depends. That's an epidemiologist's favorite answer. It depends. It depends on the type of immune disorder that people have. So if you have somebody who is on immunosuppressant medications, specifically they're on medications that are going to suppress the B cells. Those are the cells that produce antibodies in the body. So if you've got somebody who's on medication or who has an immune disorder, a genetic mutation that affects the B cell production, they're unlikely to be able to produce antibodies. It may be that they can't produce any at all. It may be that they have a weak response, but they do some. So it really, it's going to differ. If we've got people who make perfectly normal B cells but don't make T cells, then they may have an antibody response that looks just fine, or at least is a high enough level that can be protective to them. So it's very varied. We have some good data at this point on people, transplant patients. Some of the researchers at Johns Hopkins have done some really excellent studies looking at the immune response to the mRNA vaccines in people who were transplant recipients. So you can take a look at that. Some of the population does respond and does produce antibodies, and that's excellent. Some actually after a booster dose, even with the people we call non-responders, so the people who didn't produce antibodies or didn't have a robust response after the first two vaccines, some actually responded well to a third dose. And so it can really run the gamut. We've seen some hematological cancers. A lot of those patients actually do produce antibodies if they're not on B cell suppressant medications. Some of the people with inborn errors of immunity, they're not going to produce any at all. So it's really all over the board. But one thing to remember is that antibodies aren't the only thing that we get from vaccines. We also have the T cell response that's on the other side of the immune system. And so we still recommend that people who are immunocompromised get the vaccine, even if they don't produce antibodies, because there may still be some protection offered from the T cell response. We don't really know the level of that protection just yet, but we hope that it's better than nothing. And because the vaccines are very safe, it's better to get it and hope you get some benefit than to not get it at all and just to totally risk being not immune.
Okay, so if someone who's immunosuppressant gets the vaccine and they get the side effects like headache or fever, chills, does that mean that they had a good response and maybe they have the antibodies?
It depends. So possibly. It's not the symptomatic response isn't super well correlated with the level of antibodies that get produced. I was hit really hard with the vaccine symptoms. So I'm hoping I had a great response, but I know other people who are otherwise perfectly healthy, have no known immune suppression, aren't taking any medications. They didn't have any symptoms at all really after their vaccination. So again, it's not a great correlate. We see some people who have immune disorders who had symptoms, but did not produce a robust antibody response. The symptoms are from your immune system seeing something going on. We hope that that means producing antibodies, but it could just mean sort of being cranky at seeing an invader in the body. And while it may be enough to provide those side effects that we see and we experience, it may not be enough to actually produce a normal level of robust response.
Okay.
Could I add to that right now or no?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Do we know how is there a test or a way to know if we created if our bodies created antibodies or if we have what I'm trying to say is like the T cells, right? Mm-hmm. How do we know that our body created these antibodies? Is there a way? Is there a test that we can do?
So there are some commercially available tests. These are called semi-quantitative antibody tests. You want to look for the spike IgG antibody, semi-quantitative antibody test. The vaccine was specifically designed to target the spike protein. That's those proteins that are on the outside of the virus. That's what makes it look like a crown. Our antibodies are targeting that protein. And so if you want to see whether you have any antibodies, you would want to look for the spike IgG. Now, that being said, the tests that are commercially available are, as I've been saying, semi-quantitative. So what does that mean? That means that they're not going to give you a titer. You're not going to get an antibody titer. They basically are going to tell you, yes, you have antibodies, or no, you don't have antibodies. They'll range from 0 to 20, 0 to 2000. It kind of depends which test you get. The numbers that mean you're positive, to my knowledge, don't actually really mean anything. They're not going to tell you if you come back and you get your test and the range is 0 to 20 and you're at a 5. I can't tell you what that means in terms of your level of protection, but it does tell you that you did produce some antibodies. So you can have those tests run. They're not recommended that healthy people get these tests done. Again, it doesn't tell you how immune you will be. But there are many in the immunosuppressed community who would like the comfort of knowing that they've produced any antibodies at all. So that is available. Your physician can write you a script to go have that test done. You can get it at whatever commercial lab you go to for blood draws. In terms of the T cells, there are no FDA authorized or approved tests right now to assess post-vaccination T cell response. There is one test, it is from Adaptive Biotechnologies, that you can see, again, it's just yes, no, but you can see T cells post-infection. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to also use it post-vaccination, but again, it's not authorized for that. I don't know that it's been tested for that. So that one's that's a little harder. But it does seem like level of antibodies is a good correlate of protection. So the more antibodies you have, the more protected you seem to be. So knowing whether you have antibodies is kind of the primary target that we want to see.
All right. I have a question. How can we make sure to stay safe, and what are the current guidelines for COVID-19 precautions?
Sure. So first and foremost, vaccination. Get your vaccine. Again, like I said, even if you're immunosuppressed, it's still possible that you would have partial protection from the vaccine. And as our other guest said, it is better to, it's the side effects from the vaccines are going to be a lot less crappy than getting COVID and feeling, and having severe illness from COVID. We don't want that. So first, get your vaccine if you can. Then you still want to practice the precautions that we've been practicing since the beginning of the pandemic. Wear a mask if you can, especially if you're going to be indoors, especially if you're going to be indoors in places where there's lots of transmission going on, which, spoiler alert, is the entire country at this point. You want to still try to social distance, especially if you're not going to be wearing a mask. If you're going to be outdoors, don't sit right on top of each other. Give yourself a little space. Try to still avoid crowds, avoid densely populated areas. Those are going to be the biggies. Don't touch your face. All the things that we do to prevent other respiratory infections. Keep doing that. It's not great that we have to keep going and keep doing these things. Especially, I really feel for the immune suppressed population who's had to be extra vigilant this whole time. It's not great, but try to keep doing that, especially with Delta circulating. It's very transmissible. So still practice those precautions that we've been doing for the last year and a half at this point.
I have one more question. What are the current variants out there, and are the vaccines effective against most of them?
Yeah, so let me start with, yes, the vaccines are still very effective against all of the variants that we're seeing right now. There is some evidence that maybe there's a little bit of reduced protection, but for the most part, vaccines are still very highly effective for the variants that are circulating. The US has 4 variants that are circulating right now that are the majority of the variants circulating now. We've got Alpha, Beta, Delta, and Gamma are the 4 that are circulating. The variants have different mutations that cause different effects that the virus then has. So we have some that are a little less likely for our antibodies to bind to them. So those are a little more likely to have less vaccine effect. That's the ones that we're worried about. With Delta, it has mutations that make it more transmissible, that make it binds better to our cells, and it can produce just a lot more virus in the body, which is why we think it transmits so much more easily. There's also evidence that in unvaccinated people, Delta may cause slightly worse disease. And we have some, I believe Gamma is one of the variants that doesn't respond quite as well to the monoclonal antibody treatments. So these are the ones that we have circulating right now. There are a number of other variants of interest, which don't have quite the same level as these variants of concern, which is what Delta and Gamma are. So we're keeping an eye on the variants of interest that could mutate farther to come up with other attributes that make them more transmissible or more have worse outcomes, or aren't as responsive to the vaccine or to medications, things like that. So that's the variant situation. But yeah, for now, the vaccines are still very effective against the variants that we're seeing.
Well, that's great news. It's good to hear. I mean, we have one of our family members that I had to talk to her through her door when I visited home recently, because she doesn't believe in getting vaccinated. And her reasoning is, well, it's going to mutate a bunch more anyway, so what does it matter?
Well, I mean, the fewer people who can get the virus, the less chance it has to mutate. So it's really important that as many people as possible are immune. We would like that to be through vaccination. It's less likely that you'll have any sort of long-term effects from COVID. You won't have those from a vaccine, versus if you get COVID, sure, you'll be immune, but we don't know what's going to happen long-term if you've had any sort of organ damage or any sort of long-term issues. So it's important to get the vaccine. We're still going to see mutations. It happens. That's what viruses do. They're very, very good at that. But by more people being immunized and more people being immune to the virus, we have fewer infections, and that's fewer chance for the virus to mutate. So that's one of the reasons why we do encourage it. Now, it's possible that, yeah, we're going to see reduced efficacy of the vaccines because of some mutation that happens in the future. But this is the technology, the vaccine technology that we're using, this mRNA-based platform, we're able to adapt really quickly. And so just like with the flu vaccine, which we get a booster every year because of the changes in the virus, we can do that same thing with COVID vaccines. And so it may be that we end up, we've got different COVID vaccines that we get every year like we do with the flu vaccine. But it is challenging. It is concerning. We do keep our eye on this stuff. We've got experts all over the world who specialize in genetic mutations and viral evolution and how that affects vaccines. So you've got some great minds on it, and they're doing the best that they can to make sure that the vaccines do stay efficacious.
Okay, all right. Steve, did you have a couple of questions to ask?
Yeah. So now that the booster shots are available for the immunocompromised population, I think you kind of already covered part of this question. Can we expect the same side effects as the other shots?
Yeah, so you really shouldn't have too many extra side effects. If you have side effects, they're just likely to be the same that everyone's experiencing with the first two. There's no reason that we should have additional side effects. It's the same, at this point, it's the same exact vaccine that you have gotten for the first two doses that you would get for your third dose. So we don't expect to see any sorts of weird, rare, different side effects. Now, it's always possible that somebody's going to end up having something that we don't expect or don't see, especially as the number of vaccinees and people with booster doses increases. Odds of large numbers, you're going to get something that pops up. But for the vast majority, and the data that we've seen coming out of Israel, the data that we've seen so far in the US, does not indicate that there are any extra or more side effects from the third dose.
Okay, that's good to hear, considering I just got my third dose not too long ago. Yeah, so following up to that question, and I think this has been on the news a little bit already. When will the booster shots be available to the general public?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. So the Biden administration is committed to getting booster doses available to everyone in the United States, healthy or not. Right now, we're not entirely sure when that's going to be available. I saw something earlier that they're hoping, again, by later this fall, that those might be available to everybody. They're currently reviewing evidence right now, whether we should give booster doses at 6 months. I'm sure many of you have heard booster doses at 8 months. That seems to be primarily just from the fact that that's about as long as we've followed anybody at this point, is 8 months, because the first people got vaccinated late December. So we're really only at the 8-month mark. We don't have longer data yet. So that's where that number comes from, if you've seen that. But there still needs to be further review of the evidence, whether a third dose is needed in healthy individuals. Right now, most experts agree that there will eventually need to be a booster. Experts really don't agree on whether it should be now or later. So it'll be interesting to see how this progresses as the FDA reviews the data, as the CDC reviews the data, and to see what their recommendations are going to be.
Okay, good to know. What are your thoughts on the saying, get the shot to give children a shot?
So, because we don't have a vaccine authorized for children under 12 at the moment, they are left without protection. So they've just got their good old immune systems to try to stop the virus. But as I said, the more people who are vaccinated, the fewer infections we're likely to have. If you're immune and you get the virus, you're less likely to transmit the virus. If you do at all, you're less likely then obviously to give it to somebody else. And that counts for children as well. So right now, the goal is essentially to create a herd immunity around children. I think we're going to talk about this a little more later, but herd immunity is when we have enough people in the population to protect those individuals who cannot be immunized or in whom the vaccine does not work, to protect them from the pathogen that we're vaccinating against, in this case, COVID. So the goal is to get enough people vaccinated so that the kids are okay, even if they don't get vaccinated right away. So definitely get your vaccines, protect those kids, especially because they're going back to school. And goodness gracious, schools are just a wonderful place to get all sorts of diseases. So get your vaccines, tell your friends to get their vaccines, have the teachers get the vaccines. Everybody needs them until the kids can get them. And then all those children, please get them vaccinated. Definitely agree.
School's
great. Everyone should go to school, but wow, everyone gets sick there.
Yeah, for sure. I got two nieces, and
they're always bringing home something.
So as a follow-up to that last question, if kids don't get the vaccine, how could COVID-19 affect them in the short term and long term?
So, I mean, kids can get COVID. We've seen this. The numbers are rising, and Delta seems to, it's more transmissible, so it's going to go into kids just as easily as it's going to go into adults. Because we didn't see a lot of infections in children during the first part of the pandemic, it was believed that kids really aren't super affected by it. But that seems to be really just that most of them had asymptomatic infections, but still tested positive at a reasonably high rate, not as much as some of the adults, obviously, but kids definitely still were getting COVID. We do have what's called MIS-C, it's the multi-system inflammatory syndrome. Some children can actually have severe disease. Their immune system just goes crazy when they get the infection, and this can do long-term damage. And so that's definitely something that can happen to kids. We don't know why it happens to certain kids and not others. So it's not something you want to risk. The other thing, as I've said a few times, is that we don't know the long-term effects of COVID yet. So it could be that these kids get infections, don't have symptoms now, but later down the line, their organs were damaged enough that they, after a few years, something happens. We have no idea. Or maybe it's like you get the cold and you move on and nothing happens. We just don't know yet. But in my opinion, why run the risk? Why not keep kids from getting COVID if we can, by vaccinations, by having them wear masks? It's just, the unknowns are scary to me as somebody who researches this and works on this. And so we're just going to see more and more infections as time goes on, as the longer that these kids remain unvaccinated, the more likely we are to see more infections. And with school, it's worrisome.
Yeah.
So.
And kind of, it may be too soon to know this, but I'm just curious. And do you think this vaccine is going to be this one time, or do you think it's going to be a yearly thing? Or what are your thoughts on, in the future? Obviously we can't tell, but what is your thoughts on that? Will this be a shot that this is going to be a yearly shot that we need to take?
Yeah, I hope not, because I don't want to get that every year, because that was my second dose was not fun, but I wouldn't get it every year. If that's what we have to go to, I will get mine every year. Right. We're not really sure. It's not,
yeah, it's too new. Yeah,
it's too new. It's going to really sort of depend on the vaccination rate in the population. It's going to depend on mutations of the virus, whether we do end up with a mutation where our antibodies are less able to neutralize the virus, and so they just don't bind to it because the proteins look too different. It's going to depend on antibody waning. So how long do the antibodies actually remain in the body at a level that provides protection? Same with the T cells. How long do those stick around, and how much protection does that provide, and for how long? So we really don't know the answers, especially to those last two questions yet. We're actively working on it. This is why, again, we're asking questions. Is it 6 months? Is it 8 months? When do we need a booster? Because we just don't know. And a lot of people, it looks like they still have good levels of antibodies at 6 months, which is great news. It'll be really great to see what happens when we get to 12 months, although we need people to not get boosters so that we can get to the 12 months. But if a booster's available, go get your booster. It's hard doing this sort of research these days. Everybody in my study, all of my immune deficient cohort, everyone went running out to get their booster dose, which is excellent. But it's like, oh no, now we can't see what happens at 6 months. So it's hard to do this research. We're in observational research land now, which is an epidemiologist's bread and butter. But it makes it, we have to play the waiting game, and it kind of makes it hard to really get at some of these harder scientific questions that we have. So it's possible that we have vaccines every year. It's possible that we get them every 5 years, like we do with meningitis vaccines, or 10 years, like with tetanus. So we'll have to see.
What if herd immunity is never reached? Is it just the vaccine every year then?
Yeah, it's possible that COVID becomes endemic. And so it's just circulating all the time, low level. It just is a thing. Colds are endemic. You get the flu, it's endemic. You get it every year. So it's possible that will happen right now. That's what it's looking like, frankly. So yeah, so we'll just have to get vaccinated every year. We'll have to see whether COVID stays the same virulence, so it's still able to cause a severe disease in as many people. It may end up that the virus that ends up circulating all the time is less transmissible or is less likely to cause severe disease. Usually we get kind of a balance in viruses that are going to circulate long term between ability to infect people and ability to make people sick. So we're gonna kind of wait and see, but it's possible, yeah, that we just won't get to herd immunity, either because of vaccine waning and timing of vaccines, or because enough people don't want to get vaccinated. We'll have to wait and see.
Okay, that was one of my questions, was what do you say to people who argue that herd immunity can happen naturally and not with a vaccine?
No, unless it's going to blow through the community. In small areas, it's possible that everyone gets infected and then everybody is immune. On a large population scale, like in the country, no, and we don't want that to happen. I mean, to have herd immunity for COVID, the estimates are 70% of people need to be immune. If 70% of people have COVID, do the math. What's that mortality rate going to look like? We very much don't want to reach herd immunity from natural infection. That's bad. That's bad news. So no, let's hope it doesn't happen, but I don't think that it will happen either.
I hope not. Oh my goodness. That would be horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even think about that is just.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing. We have vaccines. They're this amazing scientific achievement. That's allowed the human race to really expand on how how long we're able to live and how healthy we're able to be, because we're able to prevent these vaccines. I mean, people used to die from measles, from mumps, from polio, from smallpox. We don't really have those as problems anymore in the United States. Well, we don't have smallpox at all. We've eradicated it. But, polio, we don't have in the United States anymore. Measles, we didn't have for a long time. It's coming back now because the vaccine rate is going down. So, we have vaccines, and we should prevent the illnesses that we can with vaccines if we have them. And for COVID, we're so lucky that we have a couple of really highly efficacious and very safe vaccines. And so we really want to get as many people vaccinated with them as we can.
Well, that was the questions I had.
Yeah, so I have what would you say for someone who is a little bit hesitant, like I was, to get the vaccine? What would you do to encourage them to get it?
Yeah, I'd want to understand why they're hesitant to get the vaccine. There are a number of different reasons. People have very valid concerns. If people are concerned about the side effects, talk to them about the side effects. Just as you came on and you told us your story. Talk to other people. We can say, we have very good data now on what these side effects look like. You can explain that the side effects are going to be so much less than having severe COVID.
And now I'm sorry to interrupt. It's FDA approved now, so studies show it's safe and all that.
Exactly.
So that's exciting.
Yep. Yeah, great. And one of the other concerns people have is that, well, these vaccines got authorized so quickly. We did shortcuts on the science. Well, most people don't actually know, but we've been researching coronavirus vaccines since SARS happened in the early 2000s. And so mRNA vaccines aren't new. This is the first time that we've ever had one approved. It's the first time we've ever used one at scale, but we've been researching this technology for actually quite a while. And there were no shortcuts to the vaccine trials that we did. There are certain standards. You have to reach a certain number of people who have the event of interest, in this case, COVID infection after vaccinations. And we were able to get the results really quickly because there were so many COVID infections. So that actually helped us out with the vaccine trials. We've had vaccine trials before. In South America, we were trying to do Zika vaccines and everyone was immune. So we couldn't actually get enough data together because nobody was getting Zika. Whereas with COVID, we were able to accrue those so quickly. So that actually helped us out. The other thing is that a lot of the bureaucracy and the red tape got streamlined through this process. And so where data review can take months during a normal process, the FDA really prioritized getting these vaccines authorized for wide-scale use. And so really the only thing, the science, we did not cut corners on the science and the safety. If anything, we, just shortened the bureaucracy and cut through some red tape. So, that's something that you can say to people to help reassure them that, no, these are safe vaccines. We've got so much data out there now on side effects. We haven't really seen lots of any really scary side effects and adverse events in large numbers. And when we do see signals, we've acted very quickly to try to figure out what's going on. So when we had the blood clots with Johnson & Johnson, they stopped using that vaccine so that we could review the data. So what's actually going on? What are the risk factors? Who's getting this? Why is this happening? So we have systems in place to really monitor the safety of vaccines, both before they're out on the market as well as long term. And I could get farther into that, but they're very safe. And so really, when you're talking to your vaccine hesitant friends and family, it's important to understand the reasons why they're hesitant to be vaccinated, and then to try to talk to them about that and help them understand maybe why their fears are a little unfounded, or that there is actually evidence to help support reasons to get the vaccine. Lots of people have lots of different reasons, and it's hard to have those conversations, and some people just won't get vaccinated. Yeah. But having those conversations is really important, and,
Sure.
and doing your best. So
Yeah, that's right. You just have to talk and respect what they decide as well.
Yep.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And then another question too, is there we have the three, we have the Johnson & Johnson, the Moderna, and the Pfizer. Is there one that works better with people that are immune suppressed? Is it all the same? What are your thoughts on that?
So we're not sure. All of the studies that have been published are with the mRNA vaccines, but that's mostly just because those have been much more widely available to everywhere across the globe. And so that's really what we have data for. And so we can't say whether something like an adenoviral vaccine like Johnson & Johnson, whether that would provide a better immune response than the mRNA vaccines. It's unlikely that we've got one that's like so much better than the other. The recommendation is still get vaccinated, get whatever vaccine you can, unless you have one of the really rare allergies. So if you're allergic to polyethylene glycol or PEG, don't get the mRNA vaccines, because that's a component of the vaccine, and that can cause a severe allergic reaction. And if you have a polysorbate allergy, you should not get the Johnson & Johnson, because that's a component of their vaccine. But aside from those two known allergies and risk factors, really it's they're safe and efficacious in everybody, and it's going to be Johnson & Johnson versus Pfizer and Moderna aren't more likely at this point to cause more of an immune response than the others.
Thank you. That was a great response, and it's what I thought.
Yeah.
Well, if nobody has any other questions, we would like to conclude this podcast and thank our special guests for being on and asking and answering our tough questions. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Questions for so long, and it's hard to get an answer
Yeah.
out of some.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. We as public health people, I work for the federal government. We want to make sure that the answers that we're giving you are data-based and that we have evidence. We don't just want to say, yeah, it's fine, go do whatever. we want to make sure that the community is really safe and that people are safe and that we're, putting out the best recommendations that we possibly can. And so, that's why it can be hard to get answers. Also, we're still really early in this process. I mean, COVID's only been around since the very end of 2019. So for viral research, that's still pretty young. And so we need to it takes time. And in time, we will get answers to some of these questions. But until we get to that point, we've got studies that are ongoing. We have lots of good data that's being generated. And so we'll get answers slowly as we go. But the best thing for right now is just to, continue staying safe, get vaccinated if you can, keep wearing your mask, keep social distancing, just be smart, and do your best with the situation. So.
Yeah. Right. On that note, I'm going to conclude the recording.
We would like to thank you again for listening and thank CRN for their support in creating the podcast.